The airport was packed that Sunday evening. People rushed in all directions, dragging suitcases and checking boarding passes. Among them was Tanya Wilson, a 34-year-old mother of two, her shoulders slightly slumped from the weight of her weekend bag and the exhaustion that came with traveling alone with children. "Come on, honey," she called to her 6-year-old daughter, Maya, who had stopped to watch a colorful display in a gift shop window. Her son, Darius, 10 years old, and already showing signs of his mother's practical nature, stayed close by her side, keeping track of their gate number. They had spent the weekend visiting Tanya's mother in Atlanta, a trip they made every few months. Now it was back to their small apartment in New York, back to Tanya's job as a hotel receptionist, back to the daily struggle of making ends meet. "Flight 1857 to New York is now boarding," announced a voice over the loudspeaker. Tanya gathered her children and their belongings and joined the line. She had splurged on the plane tickets instead of taking the bus, a rare treat after receiving a small bonus at work. Still, they were in the last boarding group, and by the time they made it onto the plane, the overhead bins were nearly full. "I'm sorry, ma'am," said the flight attendant, a young woman with a kind smile. "You'll need to check that bag." Tanya nodded, too tired to argue, though she knew it would mean an extra 30 minutes at baggage claim when they landed. 30 minutes. That would eat into the children's already limited sleep time before school tomorrow. After settling the children in their seats by the window, Tanya took the aisle seat, leaving the middle seat empty. She hoped it would stay that way, but the flight was full. Minutes later, a tall man in an expensive-looking suit approached. "I believe that's my seat," he said, pointing to the middle seat. Tanya nodded and helped her children move over. The man sat down, immediately pulling out a leather portfolio filled with papers covered in numbers and charts. He didn't look at Tanya or the children, focused entirely on his work. From his polished shoes to his gold watch, everything about him screamed money and importance. Tanya recognized his type from the hotel where she worked, the kind of guest who rarely made eye contact with the staff. She turned her attention back to her children, helping them buckle their seat belts. His name was David Porter, though Tanya wouldn't learn this until later. At 52, he was a partner at one of New York's most successful investment firms. The papers he reviewed contained information about potential international investments worth millions. To him, this flight was just another inconvenience in his busy schedule, a necessary pause between important meetings. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration, and Tanya made sure her children were paying attention. David barely looked up from his papers. As the plane taxied toward the runway, a commotion began several rows ahead. A passenger was having trouble understanding the flight attendant's instructions to stow his large bag. "Je ne comprends pas," the man said repeatedly, his French accent thick with frustration. The flight attendant, clearly not understanding French, kept repeating herself in English, only louder, which was doing nothing to solve the problem. Without thinking twice, Tanya stood up. "Excuse me," she said to David, who reluctantly moved his legs to let her pass. She made her way to the confused passenger and spoke to him in perfect French, explaining what the flight attendant needed him to do. The man's face relaxed with relief as he thanked her and complied with the instructions. "Thank you so much," the flight attendant said as Tanya returned to her seat. "You really saved us there." David looked up from his papers, noticing Tanya for the first time. She just smiled politely and returned to her children, helping them find their favorite snacks in her bag. The plane took off, and the flight settled into a rhythm. Darius fell asleep almost immediately, while Maya colored quietly in her book. Tanya closed her eyes, hoping to catch a few minutes of rest. Her moment of peace was interrupted when the passenger in front of her began talking loudly to a flight attendant, this time in Spanish, gesturing toward his meal tray. The flight attendant looked confused. Once again, Tanya stood up and leaned forward. In fluent Spanish, she translated the man's dietary concerns. The flight attendant smiled gratefully and went to find an appropriate meal. David was now watching her with undisguised curiosity. He had closed his portfolio and was openly studying this woman who had, in the span of 30 minutes, demonstrated fluency in 3 languages. When the drink cart came by, The flight attendant spoke to Tanya in English, but Tanya noticed her slight accent. ¿Prefieres hablar en español? Tanya asked gently. The flight attendant's face lit up, and they chatted briefly in Spanish as she served their drinks. David listened, clearly impressed. The real surprise came an hour into the flight when an elderly Chinese couple a few rows back needed help. The husband had pressed the call button repeatedly, trying to explain something to a different flight attendant who couldn't understand them. Tanya noticed and once again excused herself. This time, David watched as she spoke in what sounded like perfect Mandarin to the elderly couple, who responded with obvious relief and gratitude. When she returned to her seat, David couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. That was Mandarin, right? He asked. Tanya nodded, a bit surprised that he had spoken to her. And before that was French and Spanish, he continued. How many languages do you speak? Tanya tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, slightly embarrassed by the attention. 7, fluently, she said. English, French, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, and Portuguese. David's eyebrows shot up. 7 languages? That's extraordinary. Where did you learn them all? Tanya glanced at her sleeping children before answering. My mother worked for diplomatic families when I was growing up. We lived in their homes in different countries. I picked up languages easily as a child, and I loved learning them. That's an incredible skill, David said, fully engaged now, his work forgotten. Are you a translator? An interpreter? Tanya's smile faltered slightly. No, she said. I work at the front desk of a hotel in Manhattan. It comes in handy sometimes with international guests. David frowned, clearly puzzled. Before he could ask another question, the flight attendant approached again, this time with another crew member who spoke to Tanya in Russian. Apparently, there was another passenger issue that needed her linguistic skills. For the remainder of the flight, David watched as Tanya moved between helping her children and assisting various passengers and crew members in different languages. She switched between them effortlessly, her pronunciation perfect in each one, her manner always kind and patient. What amazed him most was that she seemed entirely unaware of how exceptional her abilities were. She helped people communicate as naturally as breathing, then returned to her seat to help her daughter with her coloring book or check on her sleeping son. By the time the plane began its descent into New York, David had abandoned any pretense of working. His mind was racing, filled with possibilities. He had made his fortune recognizing untapped potential in businesses. Now he was seeing something even more valuable: untapped human potential. As the plane landed and passengers prepared to disembark, David made a decision. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. I know this might seem strange, he said, handing the card to Tanya, but I think your language skills are extraordinary, and they could be put to much better use than checking in hotel guests. My firm works with international clients constantly, and someone with your abilities would be invaluable. Tanya took the card hesitantly, reading the embossed letters. David Porter, partner, Meridian Global Investments. I'm not trying to be forward, David added quickly, seeing her hesitation. This is strictly professional. If you're interested in exploring opportunities that might better match your talents, please call my office. My assistant can set up a meeting. The plane had reached the gate and people were starting to stand and retrieve their bags. Tanya slipped the card into her pocket, not entirely sure what to make of this unexpected offer. I should get my children home, she said, gently waking Darius. It's a school night. David nodded, collecting his things. Of course, but please consider calling. Talent like yours shouldn't go to waste. As they parted ways in the terminal, Tanya holding her children's hands and heading toward baggage claim, David walking briskly toward the exit where his driver would be waiting. Neither of them knew that this chance encounter at 30,000 feet was about to change both their lives forever. Tanya tucked the business card deeper into her pocket, already half convinced she would never use it. After all, people like her didn't get lucky breaks from people like him. But as Maya skipped alongside her, chattering about going back to school tomorrow, a small voice in the back of Tanya's mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, this time, would be different. 2 weeks passed and the business card remained tucked in the drawer of Tanya's bedside table. Life had returned to its normal rhythm, early mornings getting the children ready for school, Long shifts at the hotel, evenings spent helping with homework and preparing for the next day. But David Porter couldn't forget the woman from the plane. Her linguistic abilities kept coming to mind during international conference calls where translators stumbled over financial terms, or when cultural misunderstandings created friction with overseas clients. He found himself wondering if she had thrown his card away. Tanya stared at the card again that night after putting the children to bed. The glossy finish and raised lettering felt like they belonged to a different world. She ran her thumb over the phone number, wondering what would happen if she called. Would the man even remember her? Would his offer still stand? Or would she just be embarrassing herself? Her friend Lucia had laughed when Tanya told her about the encounter. "Girl, that sounds like the beginning of a movie where things go very wrong," Lucia had said. "Rich white guy offers poor black woman a job out of nowhere? I don't trust it." Tanya understood Lucia's skepticism. Life had taught them both to be cautious of unexpected generosity, especially from powerful strangers. But something about David Porter's earnest surprise at her abilities had seemed genuine. The next morning her decision was made for her. The hotel manager called Tanya into his office to inform her that due to budget cuts, they were reducing her hours. Not a complete layoff, but enough of a cut to make her already tight budget nearly impossible. That evening, after the children were asleep, Tanya took out the card again. What did she have to lose? Taking a deep breath, she dialed the number. A polished receptionist answered. "Meridian Global Investments, how may I direct your call?" "I'd like to speak with David Porter, please," Tanya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "May I ask who's calling?" "Tanya Wilson. We met on a flight from Atlanta 2 weeks ago." There was a pause, and Tanya was certain she would be politely dismissed. Instead, the receptionist said, "One moment, please, Ms. Wilson." After a brief hold, David's voice came through the line, sounding genuinely pleased. "Ms. Wilson, I was hoping you'd call. Do you have time to meet this week?" They arranged to meet at a coffee shop near Tanya's home the following afternoon, during her new shortened workday. Tanya hung up the phone with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The coffee shop was busy when Tanya arrived, but she spotted David immediately. Despite the casual setting, he still wore a suit, though he'd removed the tie. He stood when he saw her, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as she sat down. "I wasn't sure you would call." "I almost didn't," Tanya admitted, accepting the coffee he'd already ordered for her. "Your offer seemed too good to be true." David smiled. "I understand your caution, but I assure you my interest is purely professional. Your language skills are extraordinary, and I believe they could be put to better use." "What exactly are you proposing?" Tanya asked, still wary. David leaned forward. "Our firm deals with clients around the world. We employ translators and interpreters regularly, but having someone in-house who speaks multiple languages fluently would be invaluable. The cultural understanding that comes with language fluency is something money can't buy." Tanya sipped her coffee, considering his words. "I don't have a degree," she said finally. "I never finished college." "May I ask why not?" Tanya hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "My mother got sick when I was in my second year. I dropped out to care for her and work full-time. After she passed, I had already been out of school. Too long, and the cost." She shrugged. "Life happened." David nodded, listening intently. "And the children's father?" "Not in the picture," Tanya said firmly, making it clear that subject was closed. "I understand," David said. "Here's what I'm thinking. Our firm has a foundation that funds education for promising individuals. I'd like to sponsor you to complete your degree in international business and translation studies. While you study, we can provide a stipend that would allow you to focus on your education while supporting your family. Upon graduation, you would join our firm in a role designed to utilize your unique skills." Tanya stared at him, waiting for the catch. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" David's expression grew thoughtful. "My grandmother was an immigrant from Poland. She spoke 5 languages but could only find work cleaning houses because her accent was too thick, and her education wasn't recognized here. She died never having used her full potential." He paused. When I heard you on that plane, switching between languages so effortlessly, helping people communicate, I saw someone with extraordinary gifts being overlooked by a system that often fails to recognize talent if it doesn't come in the expected package. Tanya looked down at her coffee, overwhelmed by his words and the opportunity they represented. "This sounds incredible," she said slowly. "But I have children. I can't just rearrange my life for school. The program I'm thinking of offers flexible scheduling, including evening and weekend classes. We can arrange childcare assistance if needed. Your children are part of the equation, not an obstacle." Tanya's mind raced. Was this really happening? Could she trust this offer? "I'd need to think about it," she said finally. "And I'd want everything in writing. The terms, the expectations, all of it." David smiled. "I wouldn't expect anything less. Take your time to consider. Research our firm. Check my credentials. I want you to be completely comfortable with this arrangement." He slid a folder across the table. "Here's information about the foundation, the educational program I'm suggesting, and a preliminary outline of what we're offering. My direct number is on the first page. Call me with any questions anytime." Tanya took the folder, still somewhat dazed by the conversation. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. "There must be plenty of multilingual people in New York with actual qualifications." David leaned back in his chair. "Qualifications can be acquired. Your natural ability with languages, combined with your obvious intelligence and work ethic, those are much harder to find. Plus, you have something many candidates lack: real-world experience. You've lived in different cultures, not just studied them. That perspective is invaluable in international business." As they parted ways outside the coffee shop, David extended his hand. "I hope to hear from you soon, Ms. Wilson." Tanya shook his hand, the folder clutched tightly in her other arm. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Porter. I'll be in touch." That evening, after putting the children to bed, Tanya spread the contents of the folder across her small kitchen table. The foundation was real. She had looked it up online. The educational program was at a respected university with a flexible schedule designed for working adults. The stipend offered was generous enough to replace her reduced income at the hotel and then some. It seemed legitimate, but doubt still nagged at her. People like her didn't get breaks like this. There had to be a catch. Over the next few days, Tanya did her research. She called the foundation and spoke with the program coordinator, who confirmed that David had indeed inquired about sponsoring a new student. She looked up David Porter online and found articles about his work, his firm, and his foundation's previous scholarships. She even asked her neighbor, a law student, to look over the paperwork. "This is solid," he told her. "If anything, it's generous. The only obligation is that you work for his firm for 2 years after graduation, which is standard for this kind of educational sponsorship." A week after their coffee meeting, Tanya called David again. "I'd like to accept your offer," she said when he answered, "but I have conditions." "I'm listening," David replied. "I want to continue working part-time at the hotel until I'm sure this program is a good fit. I need stability for my children. That's reasonable. And I want to be involved in planning my educational path. I know what my strengths and weaknesses are. Of course, it's your education. Last thing," Tanya said, her voice firm. "I don't want special treatment beyond the financial support. If I do this, I want to earn it. I need to know I belong there." There was a smile in David's voice when he responded. "Ms. Wilson, based on our brief acquaintance, I have no doubt you'll more than earn your place. When can you start?" The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings with university advisors, and preparations. Tanya found herself in an accelerated program that would allow her to complete her degree in international business with a specialization in translation and cross-cultural communication in just over 2 years. The children were excited about their mother going back to school, especially when they learned it meant moving to a slightly larger apartment closer to their schools. The stipend from the foundation covered not just tuition, but living expenses that allowed Tanya to reduce her hotel hours further as the semester progressed. David kept his distance, checking in occasionally but never overstepping. He made it clear that while he had initiated this opportunity, Tanya's success would be entirely her own. On her first day of classes, Tanya stood outside the university building, watching other students stream past. Many were younger, some were older. Some wore designer clothes, others dressed simply. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked through the doors, thinking of her children, of her mother who had sacrificed so much, and of the stranger on a plane who had seen value in her that others had missed. As she found her seat in the lecture hall, Tanya realized that for the first time in years, she was doing something purely for herself, pursuing education that would challenge her mind and recognize her natural gifts. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was hers to walk. Meanwhile, across town in his corner office, David Porter reviewed international investment proposals with a SMA. A smile. He had a good feeling about Tanya Wilson. His grandmother would have approved of this investment, not in stocks or bonds, but in human potential. Some opportunities were worth much more than money. The unlikely connection formed at Mao, 30,000 feet, was about to transform two lives in ways neither could yet imagine. For Tanya, it was the chance to finally use her gifts to their fullest potential. For David, it was a reminder of why he had entered the world of finance in the first place, to create opportunities where none existed before. As Tanya opened her textbook for her first class, Introduction to International Business Relations, a new chapter was beginning for both of them. The autumn leaves had begun to fall when Tanya completed her first semester of classes. Her kitchen table was covered with textbooks and notebooks, a laptop David's foundation had provided, and empty coffee mugs that testified to late nights of studying. Her children had adapted to their new routine, proud to tell their friends that their mom was in college. That first semester hadn't been easy. After years away from formal education, Tanya had struggled to find her academic footing. There were nights when she questioned her decision, wondering if she was being foolish to think she could compete with younger students who didn't have children depending on them. But her natural aptitude for languages had given her an advantage in her translation. Courses and her life experience brought perspective to business discussions that her classmates couldn't match. By midterm, she had found her rhythm and her confidence. David had kept his distance, true to his word that this opportunity was hers to shape. They met for coffee once a month, where he would ask about her classes and she would share her progress. These meetings were brief but became increasingly comfortable as they got to know each other better. Today's meeting felt different, though. David had asked her to come to his office instead of their usual coffee shop. As Tanya rode the elevator to the 47th floor of the gleaming Midtown Tower that housed Meridian Global Investments, she couldn't help feeling nervous. The receptionist greeted her by name, a surprise that momentarily threw her off balance. "Mr. Porter is expecting you, Ms. Wilson. Right this way." She followed the young woman through a maze of glass-walled offices until they reached a corner suite with views of Central Park. David stood when she entered, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming," he said, his manner more formal than usual. "I hope the location change wasn't inconvenient." "It's fine," Tanya replied, trying to hide her nervousness. "Is everything okay with the program?" David smiled reassuringly. "Everything's great. Your professors speak very highly of your work. That's actually why I asked you here today." He picked up a folder from his desk and handed it to her. "We have an opportunity I'd like you to consider." Tanya opened the folder to find details of an internship at Meridian Global Investments, starting next semester. It would be part-time, fitting around her class schedule and paid. Quite well, in fact. "This is unexpected," she said, looking up from the papers. "I'm not even halfway through the program." "True," David nodded, "but we have a situation that suits your unique skills perfectly. We're negotiating a major deal with partners from Brazil, China, and Morocco. Our regular translators are struggling with the technical aspects, and cultural misunderstandings are causing delays." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Having someone who speaks Portuguese, Mandarin, and Arabic fluently, who also understands The financial concepts involved, that would be invaluable. You'd be observing primarily, learning the business from the inside while occasionally helping with translations when needed. Tanya flipped through the internship details again. I don't know, David. My course load next semester is heavy and the children. We've thought of that, he replied. The hours are flexible, and we can provide childcare here in the building when needed. There's a corporate daycare center on the 3rd floor for employees' children. He paused, watching her reaction. This isn't charity, Tanya. We need someone with your skills. If anything, we're getting a bargain. She closed the folder, still uncertain. Can I think about it? Of course. Talk it over with your kids, your professors. But we'd need to know by next week to get everything in place before the negotiations resume in January. As Tanya prepared to leave, David added, one more thing. If you accept the internship, you'll need business attire. The foundation has a stipend for that too. Professional presentation is part of the job. On the subway ride home, Tanya's mind raced. The internship would mean less time with her children, but the experience would be invaluable. And the additional income would help build the savings she'd been trying to accumulate, a safety net she'd never had before. That evening, she discussed it with her children over dinner. So you'd be working in one of those big fancy buildings? Her son, Darius, asked, his eyes wide. Yes, but only a few days a week, Tanya explained. And sometimes you might need to go to the daycare there if Aunt Lucia can't watch you after school. Maya, always the more sensitive of the two, looked worried. Will you still help me with my homework? Always, Tanya promised, squeezing her daughter's hand. We'll just have to be extra organized and think of it this way, we'll all be students together. Later, after the children were asleep, Tanya called her friend Lucia. Girl, take the internship, Lucia said without hesitation. This is the foot in the door people like us never get. Those fancy firms never even look at our resumes no matter how qualified we are. But what if I can't handle it all? Classes, internship, kids, then you adjust, Lucia said simply. But don't talk yourself out of an opportunity before you even try. Your babies will be proud to see their mama in that big tower, showing all those finance bros what a real boss looks like. Tanya laughed, some of her tension easing. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise, Lucia replied. You're just finally listening. The next day, Tanya met with her academic advisor, Professor Chen, who also encouraged her to accept the internship. The practical experience will complement your theoretical studies, the professor explained. And having Meridian on your resume will open doors, regardless of where you ultimately choose to work. By the end of the week, Tanya had made her decision. She called David's office and left a message accepting the position. The winter break flew by. Tanya took her children to visit her mother's sister in Atlanta, studied for the upcoming semester, and with Lucia's help, shopped for professional clothing with the stipend David had mentioned. It felt strange to buy silk blouses and tailored pants when she'd spent years in the hotel's polyester uniform, but Lucia insisted she looked like she belonged in the boardroom. Own it, Lucia told her as they stood in the dressing room of a department store, Tanya wearing a navy pantsuit that fit her perfectly. You earned this. January arrived with heavy snow and Tanya's first day at Meridian Global Investments. She dropped the children at school with extra tight hugs, then made her way to the Midtown Tower, her new leather portfolio tucked under her arm. The receptionist greeted her warmly and introduced her to Maria, the HR director who would handle her orientation. David speaks very highly of you, Maria said as she led Tanya through the office. It's unusual for us to bring on interns mid-program, but he was quite insistent that you were exactly what we needed. The morning was a blur of paperwork, introductions, and tours of the facility. By lunchtime, Tanya's head was spinning with new information. She was about to head to the cafeteria when David appeared at her temporary desk. How's it going so far? He asked. Overwhelming, Tanya admitted, but in a good way. David smiled. Feel up to jumping right in? Our Brazilian partners are on a video call in an hour, and our translator called in sick. Nothing complex, just a preliminary discussion. but it would be helpful to have someone who can catch any nuances we might miss. Tanya's nervous excitement must have shown on her face because David quickly added, "No pressure, you can just observe if you prefer." "No, I can do it," Tanya said, straightening her shoulders. "That's why I'm here, right?" The conference room was intimidating, all glass and chrome with a massive table surrounded by men in expensive suits. Tanya was the only woman and the only person of color in the room. She felt their curious glances as David introduced her as our new language specialist. The video call connected and 3 Brazilian executives appeared on the large screen. They greeted the room in heavily accented English, then turned to converse among themselves in rapid Portuguese. Tanya listened, carefully taking notes. When they turned back to the camera, one of them made a comment in English about some figures in the proposal. Before anyone could respond, Tanya leaned forward slightly. "Excuse me, Mr. Porter," she said quietly to David. "I think there may be a misunderstanding about the terms. When they were speaking Portuguese just now, they mentioned expecting a different interest rate than what's in our proposal." David looked surprised but recovered quickly. "Would you mind clarifying with them?" Tanya addressed the Brazilians in flawless Portuguese, explaining the apparent discrepancy. Their faces registered surprise, then respect. They responded to her directly, and a brief exchange followed. Turning back to David, Tanya explained, "They were working from an earlier draft of the proposal. They understand our CIA's current terms now, and they're actually more favorable than they expected." The rest of the call proceeded smoothly, with Tanya occasionally stepping in to clarify points or catch subtle meaning that the executive's English didn't fully convey. By the end of the meeting, the Brazilian team was directing their questions to her, clearly appreciating her linguistic bridge. When the call ended, the room was silent for a moment. Then one of the senior partners cleared his throat. "Well, that was illuminating," he said, looking at Tanya with newfound respect. "Ms. Wilson, isn't it? Where did you learn Portuguese with that accent?" "It's Rio, if I'm not mistaken." "Yes, sir," Tanya replied. "I lived there for 3 years as a child." "Remarkable," he murmured, then turned to David. "Porter, I think your instincts were right about this one." As the executives filed out, David stayed behind, his expression a mixture of pride and amusement. "So," he said when they were alone, "still feeling overwhelmed?" Tanya let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Completely, but also, I don't know. It felt right somehow." "That's because you're a natural," David replied. "You just saved us weeks of back-and-forth misunderstandings. The firm spent a fortune last year on translation services and none of them could do what you just did." He gathered his papers, then paused at the door. "By the way, the children's program on the 3rd floor goes until 7 p.m. if you need it. I told them to expect Maya and Darius occasionally." Tanya nodded, still processing the events of the meeting. "Thank you, David. For everything." "Don't thank me," he said simply. "You did the work. I just opened a door." As David left, Tanya remained in the conference room for a moment, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. 6 months ago, she had been checking in tourists at a hotel front desk, worried about reduced hours and how to make rent. Now she was sitting in a top-floor conference room, having just helped navigate an international business negotiation. The path ahead would still be challenging. Balancing school, work, and motherhood would require all her energy and discipline. But for the first time in years, the future looked full of possibilities rather than limitations. That evening, as she helped her children with homework, Tanya couldn't help but think about how much had changed because of a chance encounter on a plane. David had seen potential in her that society had overlooked, but more importantly, he had given her the opportunity to prove that potential to herself. "Mom, are you listening?" Darius asked, pulling her from her thoughts. "Always," she replied, focusing on her son's math homework. "I'm always listening." And she was, not just to her children, but to the new path unfolding before her, one that would use all her gifts in ways she had never imagined possible. 2 years passed in a blur of classes, exams, and increasingly responsible assignments. at Meridian Global Investments. What had begun as a part-time internship had evolved into a specialized role created specifically for Tanya's unique abilities. As she approached graduation, she found herself not just translating during meetings but actively participating in them, offering insights that bridged cultural and linguistic divides. Her office, once a small desk in a shared space, was now a proper room with a window overlooking the city. On its walls hung her children's artwork alongside framed certificates from language proficiency exams she'd aced. On her desk stood a photo of Darius and Maya, now 12 and 8, growing taller and more confident alongside their mother. Today was a milestone, the final presentation of her capstone project, the last requirement before receiving her degree. Tanya stood before her academic advisors and a small audience of students, presenting her research on optimizing cross-cultural business negotiations through linguistic analysis. When we truly understand not just the words, but the cultural frameworks behind them, she explained, pointing to her slides, we can identify potential misunderstandings before they derail negotiations. This isn't just about accurate translation, it's about cultural interpretation. Professor Chen nodded approvingly from the front row. Beside her sat David, who had asked permission to attend. Over the past 2 years, their professional relationship had evolved into a friendship built on mutual respect. He had become something of an uncle figure to her children, occasionally joining them for weekend outings to museums or bringing educational books he thought they might enjoy. After fielding questions from the panel with confidence, Tanya concluded her presentation to enthusiastic applause. As people filed out, David approached with a wide smile. "Congratulations," he said. "That was brilliant." "Thank you," Tanya replied, gathering her materials. "I couldn't have done any of this without your support." "Nonsense," David waved away. "Her thanks. You did the work. Speaking of which, are you free for lunch? There's something I'd like to discuss." They walked to a small restaurant near campus, one they'd visited often for their monthly check-ins. After ordering, David pulled a folder from his briefcase, reminiscent of their first meeting years ago. "The partners and I have been discussing your future at Meridian," he began. "Your contract technically ends with your graduation next month, but we'd like to offer you a permanent position." He slid the folder across the table. Tanya opened it and her eyes widened at the title on the offer letter. Director of International Client Relations. This is a senior position," she said, looking up in surprise. "Yes," David nodded. "With a team of 4 reporting to you initially. The role would involve overseeing all our major international accounts, with a focus on enhancing communication and resolving cultural barriers to business." Tanya skimmed the details, her heart racing when she saw the compensation package. The salary was more than 4 times what she'd made at the hotel. There were benefits, stock options, a retirement plan, security she'd never imagined possible. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say yes," David smiled. "You've more than earned it. In the past 2 years, your work has directly contributed to the successful closure of deals worth over $200 million. The Lee Group from Beijing specifically requested you be present for all future negotiations. The partners recognize your value." Their food arrived, but Tanya barely noticed, still processing the offer. "There's one more thing," David continued, his tone growing more serious. "The role would involve some international travel, not excessive, perhaps once a quarter for a week or so. I know that's a consideration with the children." Tanya nodded slowly. "It would be challenging, but Lucia has always been willing to help, and the kids are getting more independent. Darius is almost a teenager now, if you can believe it." "They're remarkable children," David agreed. "You've done an amazing job raising them, especially given the circumstances." Tanya smiled, thinking of her children's resilience and how they'd adapted to the changes in their lives. They'd moved to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. Darius had joined the school's math team, while Maya was thriving in an arts program. They'd never had so many opportunities before. "Take some time to think about it," David said. "Discuss it with the kids, The position would start a month after graduation, so you'd have some time to breathe. Later that evening, after homework and dinner, Tanya sat her children down in their living room. "I've been offered a big job at Mr. Porter's company," she explained. "It would mean I'd be working full-time there, and sometimes I might need to travel." Darius, always practical, asked, "Would we have to move again?" "No, we'd stay right here," Tanya assured him. "But I might need to be away for a few days sometimes, and Aunt Lucia would stay with you." Maya climbed into her mother's lap, though she was getting almost too big for it. "Would you call us every day when you're gone?" "Every single day," Tanya promised, hugging her daughter close. "And I'd bring you back something special from each place I visit." "Like what?" Maya asked, her interest piqued. "Well, if I went to China, maybe a traditional doll. Or from Brazil, perhaps a special stone from the beaches there." Darius, trying to appear grown up but clearly excited, asked, "Could we maybe come with you sometimes, like during summer break?" "That's a wonderful idea," Tanya said, smiling at her son's thoughtfulness. "I'll definitely ask about that possibility." The conversation continued, the children asking questions about her new role and what it would mean for their family. Their enthusiasm and pride in their mother's accomplishments brought tears to Tanya's eyes. "I'm so proud of both of you," she told them. "You've been so patient and supportive while I've been in school. This new job is for all of us, for our future." The next day, Tanya called David to accept the position. 2 weeks later, she walked across the stage at graduation, accepting her diploma to the cheers of her children, Lucia, and several colleagues from Meridian who had come to support her, including David and 2 other partners. Her first official day as Director of International Client Relations arrived in June. As Tanya rode the elevator to the 47th floor, dressed in a new suit she'd bought to mark the occasion, she thought about how far she'd come from that exhausted mother on a plane from Atlanta. Maria from HR met her with a warm hug. "Your office has been moved," she explained. "The partners wanted you closer to the main conference room." Tanya followed her down a hallway she knew led to the executive wing. Stopping before a door with her name on a brass plate, Maria handed her a key card. "Welcome to our new space, Director Wilson." The office was twice the size of her previous one, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan. A sleek desk and comfortable seating area filled the space, along with built-in bookshelves, already stocked with reference materials in multiple languages. On the desk sat a small gift box with a card. Tanya opened it to find a beautiful fountain pen with her initials engraved on it. The card read simply, "To New Beginnings. David." Her first week in the new role was intense. She met with each member of her team individually, learning about their backgrounds and strengths. 2 were experienced translators. 1 was a cultural consultant with expertise in Asian markets. The 4th was a recent graduate with a background similar to Tanya's, multilingual but from a non-traditional background. "I requested Leon specifically for your team," David explained when he stopped by her office that Friday. "He reminds me of you. Brilliant but overlooked. 7 languages, grew up in foster care, worked his way through college. I thought you might be a good mentor for him." Tanya smiled, touched by David's thoughtfulness. "Thank you for thinking of that. I'll make sure he gets the support I wish I'd had earlier." Her first major test came the following month when a critical negotiation with a French conglomerate reached an impasse. The Meridian team had been working on the deal for months before Tanya joined the company, and tensions were high. "They keep changing their terms," complained one of the senior partners during a strategy meeting. "Every time we think we've reached an agreement, they come back with new concerns." "May I review the correspondence?" Tanya asked. That evening, she stayed, late in her office, carefully reading through months of emails and meeting notes. Around midnight, she noticed something, a pattern in the French executive's responses that had been missed by others. The next morning, she requested a meeting with the partners. "I think I understand the problem," she explained, spreading out her notes. "It's not that they're being difficult. There's a fundamental cultural misunderstanding about the nature of the partnership we're proposing." She pointed to specific phrases in the French communications. "In French business culture, These terms imply a certain type of ongoing relationship. Our proposals have been using American business terminology that, when translated literally, suggests a different type of arrangement than what we actually intend. The partners listened with growing interest as Tanya outlined a new approach, not just revising the language of the proposal, but restructuring it to address the cultural expectations of the French executives. "Let me handle the next call," she suggested. "I think we can resolve this quickly if we adjust our approach." 3 days later, Tanya led a video conference with the French team, beginning the conversation in flawless French and explaining the new framework for the partnership. The change in the French executive's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. What had been months of frustration resolved in a 2-hour call, with both sides expressing enthusiasm for moving forward. When the call ended, the Meridian partners were almost speechless. "That was remarkable," said the most senior partner, a man who rarely offered praise. "You didn't just translate the words, you translated the entire concept into something that worked for both cultures." Word of Tanya's success spread quickly through the firm. In the following weeks, she was called into meetings for deals involving clients from China, Brazil, Russia, and Morocco. Each time, her ability to understand not just the language, but the cultural context proved invaluable. By the end of her 3rd month, Tanya had become one of the most sought-after team members for international negotiations. Her approach to cross-cultural communication was being implemented across the firm, and other companies were beginning to take notice. At home, the children were thriving in their new reality. Tanya's increased income had allowed for music lessons for Maya and coding camp for Darius. They had taken their first family vacation, a week at a beach resort, and were planning a trip to visit Brazil the following summer, combining one of Tanya's business trips with family exploration. One evening, as Tanya helped Darius with a school project, her phone rang. It was David. "Sorry to bother you at home," he began, "but I wanted to give you some news personally. The Harvard Business Review is doing a feature on innovative approaches to international business. They've heard about your work and want to interview you for their cover story." Tanya sat down, stunned. "Are you serious? How did they even hear about me?" "Word gets around," David chuckled, "especially when someone revolutionizes how a major investment firm conducts international business. This could be huge for your career, Tanya, and well-deserved." After hanging up, Tanya stood by the window of their apartment, looking out at the city lights. 3 years ago, she had been struggling to make ends meet, her exceptional linguistic abilities largely unrecognized except when helping confused hotel guests. Now she was about to be featured in one of the most prestigious business publications in the world. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been late nights of studying while the children slept, moments of doubt when coursework and job responsibilities seemed overwhelming, instances of prejudice to overcome in both academic and professional settings. But through it all, she had persevered, driven by determination to create a better life for her children and to finally use the gifts she'd been born with. And she hadn't done it alone. David's recognition of her potential had opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. As if summoned by her thoughts, Maya appeared at her side. "Are you okay, Mom? You look like you're thinking really hard about something." Tanya smiled down at her daughter, pulling her into a hug. "I'm more than okay, sweetie. I'm just thinking about how lucky we are." "Because of your cool job?" Maya asked. "Partly," Tanya replied, "but mostly because we have each other, and because sometimes life surprises you in the best possible ways." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Tanya sat at her kitchen table, no longer covered with textbooks but now holding a laptop where she was preparing notes for the Harvard Business Review interview. She thought about the chain of events that had led her here, beginning with a chance encounter on a plane. She opened her email and composed a short message to David. "Thank you for seeing possibility where others saw limitations. My children and I will never forget the door you opened for us. Some debts can never be repaid. They can only be paid forward. I intend to do just that." David's reply came quickly. "The only thanks I need is seeing you succeed. Though I will." Take credit for recognizing a good investment when I see one. The returns have exceeded even my expectations. D. Tanya smiled and returned to her notes, thinking about all the other talented individuals whose potential went unrecognized due to circumstances beyond their control. Perhaps part of her new path would involve creating opportunities for others, just as David had done for her. One chance encounter had changed the trajectory of her life. Now she was positioned to do the same for others, a ripple effect of opportunity and recognition that could extend far beyond her own story. 5 years had passed since that fateful flight from Atlanta to New York. The world had changed, and so had Tanya Wilson. The Harvard Business Review article had been just the beginning. Her innovative approach to cross-cultural business communication had transformed how Meridian Global Investments operated internationally, leading to a series of successful deals that other firms couldn't seem to navigate. Today, Tanya stood before the mirror in her office, adjusting the collar of her tailored suit. The nameplate on her door now read, Tanya Wilson Partner, a promotion that had come 6 months earlier, making her the first black woman partner in the firm's history. Her phone buzzed with a text from Darius, now 17, and in his final year of high school. Good luck today, Mom, you're going to crush it. She smiled, typing back a quick thanks. Her son had grown into a thoughtful young man with a talent for computer science and mathematics. Maya, now 13, was blooming as an artist and musician, her natural ear for languages matching her mother's. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. David entered, looking much the same as he had 5 years ago, though a few more strands of gray peppered his hair. Ready for the big day? He asked, his voice warm with pride. As ready as I'll ever be, Tanya replied, gathering her presentation materials. Are they all here? All 200 of them, David confirmed. CEOs, university presidents, foundation directors. Exactly the audience we need for this launch. Together, they walked to the large auditorium Meridian had rented for the occasion. The room was filled with business leaders, educators, and media representatives, all gathered for the announcement of the Wilson Foundation for Multilingual Excellence. As Tanya took the stage, a hush fell over the crowd. She surveyed the faces before her, some curious, some skeptical, all influential in their respective fields. Good morning, she began, her voice steady and confident. 5 years ago, I was a hotel receptionist struggling to support 2 children on minimum wage. Today, I stand before you as a partner at one of the world's leading investment firms. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. My journey is exceptional, not because of who I am, but because of how rare such journeys are in our society. There are thousands of people with extraordinary linguistic gifts who never get the opportunity to use them professionally. Their talents go unrecognized because they don't have the right credentials, the right connections, or simply because they don't look like what we expect expertise to look like. On the screen behind her, images appeared of diverse individuals, many from underrepresented groups, along with statistics about multilingualism in America. The United States is home to speakers of over 350 languages. Over 60 million Americans speak a language other than English at home. Yet our businesses and institutions routinely spend billions on translation services, while this wealth of linguistic talent remains untapped. Today, we're changing that approach. She outlined the mission of the Wilson Foundation: to identify multilingual individuals with exceptional abilities but limited opportunities, provide them with education and professional development, and connect them with businesses in need of their skills. This isn't charity, Tanya emphasized, echoing words David had once said to her. This is smart business. In a global economy, multilingualism is a competitive advantage. The foundation will not only transform individual lives but will enhance America's position in international business. The details of the program were impressive. Funded initially by Meridian Global Investments and several partner companies, the foundation would offer full scholarships to selected candidates, mentorship, programs, and guaranteed internships at participating firms. We've already identified our first cohort of 20 fellows, Tanya announced. They include a Somali refugee who speaks 6 languages and works as a parking attendant, a young Puerto Rican woman who translates for her community while working at a fast food restaurant, a Vietnamese-American veteran who learned Arabic and Pashto during his military service, but now drives for a rideshare company. As she spoke, photographs and brief biographies of these individuals appeared on the screen, putting human faces to the program's mission. Each of these people has a story similar to mine. Each has extraordinary abilities that our economy has failed to recognize and utilize. With proper support and opportunity, each can contribute not just to their own success, but to our collective prosperity. In the front row, David watched with quiet satisfaction. When Tanya had first proposed creating the foundation, he had immediately offered Meridian support, recognizing the potential to replicate the success they'd found with her on a much larger scale. The Wilson Foundation isn't just about helping individuals, Tanya continued. It's about changing how we think about talent and opportunity in America. It's about recognizing that brilliance doesn't always come with a prestigious degree or the right zip code. Sometimes it's sitting next to you on a plane, speaking 7 languages while juggling the demands of single parenthood. A knowing chuckle rippled through the audience. Many had read about her first meeting with David in the numerous profiles that had been written about her rise at Meridian. I'd like to introduce someone who understood this principle long before I did, Tanya said, gesturing toward the front row. David Porter, whose recognition of untapped potential changed not just my life, but has now created a model that will change hundreds of others. David hadn't known she would acknowledge him. He stood briefly, nodding to the applauding audience before quickly returning to his seat, never one to seek the spotlight. The Wilson Foundation officially launches today. With funding commitments of $25 million over 5 years, Tanya announced. We're partnering with 12 major corporations and 7 universities across the country. Our goal is to create a new pipeline of multilingual talent that will transform how American businesses engage globally. The presentation continued with details of the application process, the curriculum, and the expected outcomes. When the formal portion concluded, the room erupted in applause. As Tanya stepped away from the podium, journalists surged forward with questions, and business leaders lined up to express interest in partnering with the foundation. Hours later, after the last interview was completed and the final details handled, Tanya found herself alone with David in her office, both exhausted but exhilarated by the day's success. I think we did it, she said, slipping off her heels and collapsing into her chair. 20 companies asked about joining the partnership after the presentation. The first year's funding is already secure. David smiled, loosening his tie. I never doubted it would succeed. Not with you at the helm. Tanya looked at the man who had changed the course of her life with a simple business card handed across an airplane seat. Their relationship had evolved over the years from benefactor and recipient to colleagues to true friends and now to partners in this new venture. I've been thinking about that flight a lot lately, she admitted. What if we hadn't been seated together? What if that French passenger hadn't needed help? So many coincidences had to align for us to be here today. I've thought about that too, David replied. But I've come to believe it wasn't coincidence at all. Your abilities were always extraordinary. Someone would have noticed eventually. But they hadn't, Tanya pointed out. For 34 years no one had. David considered this. Perhaps the real coincidence was that the person who noticed was in a position to do something about it. And that's what we're fixing with the foundation, creating systems where talent doesn't need luck to be recognized. That evening, Tanya returned home to find her children waiting with a small celebration, a cake they'd baked themselves with. Congratulations, Mom, written in somewhat wobbly frosting. Lucia was there too, the friend who had stood by Tanya through every step of her journey. The kids showed me the live stream of your speech, Lucia said, hugging her. Girl, you were magnificent, speaking. To all those powerful people like you were born to it. Later, after Lucia had gone home and the children were getting ready for bed, Tanya sat on the balcony of their apartment, a spacious 3-bedroom in a good neighborhood, worlds away from the cramped 1-bedroom they'd occupied 5 years ago. Maya joined her, wrapped in a blanket against the cool evening air. Mom, I've been thinking about what I want to do after high school. You've got plenty of time to figure that out, sweetie, Tanya replied. You're only 13. I know, but after seeing you today, Maya hesitated. I want to help people the way Mr. Porter helped us. Find people who aren't being heard and make sure they get a chance. Tanya put her arm around her daughter, her heart swelling with pride. This, perhaps, was the greatest outcome of her journey. Not just changing her own family's circumstances, but instilling in her children a desire to create opportunity for others. That's a wonderful goal, she told Maya. And you know what? I think you'll be amazing at it. The next morning, Tanya arrived at the office early. On her desk was a package. Inside, a framed photograph of her and David from 5 years ago at her college graduation. With it was a note in David's handwriting. I've been asked many times what I saw in you that day on the plane. The truth is I saw my grandmother, brilliant, determined, overlooked. What I couldn't have predicted was how far you would take the opportunity. You've exceeded every expectation and created a legacy that will continue long after both of us are gone. Today marks not just the launch of a foundation but the beginning of a movement. I couldn't be prouder to have played a small part in your story. Tanya placed the photo on her bookshelf, next to awards and recognitions she'd received over the past 5 years. Then she turned to her computer to review applications for the Foundation's first cohort of fellows. The first file contained the story of a young mother from Detroit who spoke 4 languages and worked 3 jobs to support her family. As Tanya read about her journey, the hardships overcome, the persistent pursuit of education despite obstacles, the dreams deferred, but not abandoned, she recognized echoes of her own story. This was why she had created the Foundation. Not just to identify linguistic talent, but to recognize the extraordinary resilience and determination that often accompanied it. People who learned multiple languages despite challenging circumstances possessed qualities that couldn't be taught. In any business school, persistence, adaptability, cross-cultural understanding, and the ability to communicate across differences. Later that day, Tanya led her first meeting with the Foundation's selection committee. Looking around the table at representatives from partner companies and universities, she felt a deep sense of purpose. Today, we begin the process of changing not just individual lives, but the way America thinks about talent and opportunity, she told them. Each person we select represents dozens more who deserve similar chances. Our job is to make these stories the rule rather than the exception. As the meeting progressed, Tanya thought about the ripple effects of opportunity. David's decision to reach out to her on that flight had not only transformed her life and her children's futures, but would now extend to hundreds of others through the Foundation. Those individuals would, in turn, impact their communities and workplaces, creating an ever-widening circle of change. That evening, she was scheduled to appear on a national news program to discuss the Foundation. As she prepared in the green room, she received a text from Darius with a photo attached. He had been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship to study computer science. Tanya's eyes filled with tears of joy and pride. Her son, who 5 years ago had been attending an underfunded school with few resources, would now have opportunities she had never dreamed possible for him. Maya was thriving too in a school for the arts where her talents were nurtured daily. This was the power of one person recognizing potential in another, not just changing a single life, but creating generational transformation. As Tanya was called to the set for her interview, she squared her shoulders and thought of all the lives about to change through the work of the Foundation. The journey that had begun with a simple conversation at 30,000 feet was now reaching heights neither she nor David could have imagined. What had started as one man hearing a woman speak 7 languages on a flight had evolved into a movement to ensure that exceptional abilities would never again go unrecognized due to circumstance or background. And somewhere, on another flight, in another city, in some overlooked corner of America, there were countless others with extraordinary gifts waiting to be discovered. Thanks to Tanya Wilson and the foundation that bore her name, many of them would now have their chance to soar.